Winning.
Loser! Yo! Cut it.
And the winner loses all. You're either winning or you're losing. There's nothing in between.
I'm a loser, baby, so why don't you kill me?
On my April 2019 trip through the southeast of the United States, I hit up Six Flags Over Georgia, Dollywood, Carowinds, Busch Gardens Williamsburg, and Six Flags America. Each park had a purpose. Busch Gardens and Six Flags America because I hadn't been there in 11 years, Carowinds for Copperhead Strike, Dollywood because Lightning Rod was closed in 2018, and Six Flags Over Georgia because, well, it was cheap to fly into Atlanta, and the park happened to be open for spring break that week. There were only 7 new credits on this trip for me, but there were a lot of rides that I hadn't ridden for a long time. So I got to rejudge a lot of these coasters, and I came up with 5 that I consider winners.
I'm by winning. I win here and I win there. Now what?
And 5 that I consider losers.
You are one pathetic loser.
So let's start with my number 5 loser, Lightning Rod. I rode this in 2016, I only got 1 ride, and it was in the front car, but that 1 ride blew me away. This time I got 3 rides and got to ride in the front and the back, and there were 2 significant problems with this ride. It was running a lot slower, and it had gotten a lot rougher. I was really surprised when I rode Outlaw Run at Silver Dollar City that it was pretty rough, and it's not something I was used to on an RMC. Well, Lightning Rod has reached this point also. I guess the RMC Topper Track Woodies are not immune to getting rough. It's not rough to the point of being painful, but it was enough to jackhammer my lap bar down to the point where I was getting stapled. All this being said, Lightning Rod did not lose any spots in my rankings. It's still number 5. But instead of being a strong number 5 that I was considering moving up, it's a weak number 5 that I might want to replace with other coasters. But for now, I think my 2019 ride solidified it behind Wicked Cyclone, but in front of Diamondback. Definitely a loser on this trip, but only number 5 since it didn't lose any spots in my rankings. And now for my number 5 winner, Tennessee Tornado. Is this what Aero was becoming before they went bankrupt? If that's the case, then it's really a shame. Most Aero loopers are from the 80s or early 90s and don't have a great reputation, but this one is completely different. It opened in 1999 and its layout is pretty weird. It has a straight drop into a tunnel and gigantic inversions, and it's not the usual tight inversions that you'll find on most Aero loopers. The whole thing just feels like you're out of control. It is extremely short, but I was so impressed with it this year that I'm moving it up in my rankings. My number 4 loser is Thunderhead. Back in 2016, I really liked this GCI and I had it ranked at number 30 in my top 50. But it was closed for me in 2018 and I dropped it off my rankings after I rode a ton of great new rides. I finally got back on it in 2019 and it was pretty underwhelming. I got practically no airtime. It was basically a laterals machine, so I walked away from it thinking that it was a mid-tier GCI at best. I didn't think it was too rough. I did snag back-to-back rides without any problems, but after 2 rides, I didn't really feel the need to get back in line, even though it was basically a walk-on at that point. My number 4 winner is Intimidator. After I rode this in 2018, I determined this to be the weakest B&M Hyper I had ever ridden. My 2019 rides were much, much better. I felt like we weren't hitting the trims quite as hard, and I had a lot better time on it since the airtime felt stronger. I can now see why people are high on this was one of the better B&M Hypers, though I kind of find the layout boring and uninspired. But it does deliver a pretty fun ride, and it improved my opinion a little bit, so I consider it a winner on this trip.
Duh. Winning.
My number 3 loser is Superman Ride of Steel. My first rides on this were in 2008, and I remember thinking it was such a great ride. My 2019 rides were not good at all. The seats were super cramped and uncomfortable, especially in the front row of each car. It has that bulky box between your feet that takes up all the little room that you have. It also has sides on the T-bars that are really annoying if you have stuff in your pockets. The layout is really pointless and the airtime was just okay at best. I rode this 4 times in a row and I did not feel the need to come back later in the day. It was just pretty disappointing since I used to think this ride was a lot better than it is now. My number 3 winner is Ragin' Cajun. I was expecting nothing from this ride, and I got one of the craziest rides of the trip. We were spinning like crazy at the end, throwing those airtime pops. It was actually a really great experience. I'm sure the ride experience differs from ride to ride depending on weight distribution, but I probably had the best possible experience on this thing, so I was left with a positive impression. My number 2 loser is Copperhead Strike. and I had really mixed expectations for this ride coming into it. I went from thinking it was kind of slow and wouldn't be all that exciting, and then I moved on to thinking that the airtime might be really good on this thing, and the ride might be really great. So I finally got on it, and I was left pretty disappointed. It did run a little bit like a family coaster, and the restraints tightened pretty quickly, so it killed all the airtime moments. I think this was the perfect addition to Carowinds, but from a coaster enthusiast perspective, it was underwhelming. Now, I did ride it in the morning during a rainstorm, so maybe if it was a hot day and it had been running all day and getting heated up, it could have been a better ride, but all I have to go off of is the 3 rides I got, 2 in the back and 1 in the front, and I was pretty disappointed overall. My number 2 winner is Alpengeist. I rode this in 2008, but I didn't think much of it, and it seems like the community generally trashes this coaster or doesn't talk about it in the same conversation as Afterburn or Banshee or Montu. But to me, this is up there with the top tier inverts. The mid-course did really kill all of the speed, but that gave some pretty good hang time in the last 2 inversions. This thing is huge, it's smooth, it has massive inversions, it has pretty good theming, and all in all, I like this way more than I thought I would. And my number 1 loser is none other than Apollo's Chariot. This was my first B&M Hyper back in 2008, and for a long time I considered it my favorite steel coaster. But as time went by, I didn't really remember my rides that vividly, and I knew I really needed a re-ride to see how good it really is. I got 3 back row rides in April, and I was very, very disappointed. The airtime in the first half of the ride was basically non-existent, and the airtime at the end was just decent. The drop off the pre-drop in the back row was pretty weak. Raging Bull has the same type of drop, and that one flings you out of your seat. Apollo's Chariot did not do that at all. This went from my number 2 B&M Hyper to the lowest ranked B&M Hyper. It's still a top 50 coaster, but definitely out of my top 10. And finally, my number 1 winner is Twisted Cyclone. The more I ride this, the more I like it. I had a couple great rides last year, and I had a couple of even better rides this year. It's got a good drop, a very unique element with that reverse cobra roll, an epic wave turn, and an ejector hill before hitting the turnaround to start the second half, which is filled with strong airtime hills and a barrel roll. This ride is way too short to be an elite RMC, but for what it does it so well. I had this ranked as one of the lowest RMCs in the US, but I think I gotta move it up from the lower tier to the middle tier. I rode New Texas Giant a couple of weeks after I rode Twisted Cyclone, and even though Texas Giant is a longer ride, I think I like Twisted Cyclone's elements more, and that's why I'm ranking it higher now. If they could have added a 3rd lap without losing too much momentum, this could easily be a top tier RMC and a top 15 overall ride for me. So those are the winners and the losers from my April trip through the Southeast US. It was such a successful trip, and it righted the wrongs that happened from the July trip in 2008. It was great to refresh my opinion of so many rides, plus get a valuable new credit with Copperhead Strike. So I'm going to close out this video by showing you the 31 coasters I rode on this trip, from worst to best, and where they fit in my overall rankings.
I'm sorry, winning. You starting to get the concept now? Oops, winning.
Loser!
So